I'd now like to introduce Shelly Yu. Shelly is a Parkinson's physiotherapist and a staff member at Parkinson Society BC. She is trained in PD Warrior, Dance for PD, and Parkinson's Pilates. She is also the advocacy officer at the Canadian Physiotherapy Association's Global Health Division, which fights for healthcare equity in rural and suburban areas. Shelly, thanks, and I'll pass it over to you now.
Guys, for joining us for our last symposium talk. Today's talk is titled Keeping Active in Winter, and I suppose the main purpose of doing this talk today is now that we're at the end of November and as we move into the darker, wetter, and colder months of the winter time, we probably find ourselves staying inside more, maybe being less active, maybe eating more. And so I'm hoping that with today's webinar, we can talk about different ways that you can keep yourself active and still be motivated to do something, some exercise or some activity at home, despite this period of time when you're staying at home a little bit more. So as we go over the talk today, please do feel free to type any questions that you may have as they come up, and I will do my very best to answer them as we go along. I will be able to see the chat box as we're doing our talk today, so don't be shy, write any questions you have down. And if you've been to my talks before, you'll know that I'm very big on practical tips that you can take home. So today's going to be very much like that again, giving you some tips and tricks and insights for ways that you can perhaps create an exercise program for yourself at home, or be able to stick to the exercise program you already have for yourself. So I guess now that we're talking about exercise, we may as well begin by talking about why exercise is so important. I know that we always hear everyone say that exercise is very important when you have Parkinson's, but why is it exactly that it's important? Well, the main thing is that exercise gives you a neuroprotective response in the brain, meaning that it preserves your brain health for longer, which is true for people without Parkinson's as they age, but it's also true for people with Parkinson's as the disease progresses. So one of the main reasons exercise is seen as extra important in people with Parkinson's is because exercise has benefits of being able to not only manage your Parkinson's symptoms, but also potentially slow the Parkinson's progression down. And if we were to be more specific about exactly what exercise can do for you, well, exercise gives you endorphin release in your brain, which then improves your mood. It can improve your mental health. And at the same time, it also reduces your stress and your fatigue levels. So the more you exercise, the more energy you actually have, which you might think is a bit ironic because usually after an exercise program, you probably feel pretty tired. But the idea is you have this release of endorphins and you have your body put under stress in the exercise program. And then therefore you get a little bit more adrenaline and it makes you more awake and more alert for the rest of the day, even though physically you might feel tired from the exercise. And another important aspect of exercise as well is that our cells, our body, our bones all respond to stress. So when I say stress, I mean as in mechanical stress, so physical weight being put on them. So if you're someone who sits at home all day and you don't really stand up unless you go to the bathroom, chances are your bone density, your bone health is probably not all that great. But if you're somebody who often weight bears on your legs, you stand up, you climb upstairs, you do a bunch of things standing up and walking around, chances are your bone health is probably a lot better and your bone density is probably a lot better. And so one of the main things you'll probably see is if anybody has osteoporosis, the main exercise treatment for that is literally to weight bear. And it might be things like weightlifting. So anything that creates a bit of stress over your bones tend to help those bone cells grow stronger and help them align better so that your bones are stronger in general. And that also does mean that if you were to fall, for example, the chances of you having a fractured hip or broken ankle is definitely a lot less likely than somebody who doesn't really do much exercise. Another great benefit of exercise is that it also lowers the risk of sexual dysfunction in males. So if you think about exercise and the way that it increases circulation, it makes things easier in terms of sexual arousal, and it's less likely to have sexual dysfunction as a result. So exercise is also great for sexual health. And of course, digestive health is also part of it. So if you're somebody who has digestive issues like stomach pains, or perhaps you're somebody who has constipation, exercise is a really great way to help with that. Because as you exercise, circulation increases, blood flow increases to the areas of the gut, and it helps move things along better. But not only that, as you're moving and as the muscles contract, they also help the digestive tract contract as well. So then you end up having this movement through your bowels a lot easier than if you were to sit around and not do much. Of course, we also know that exercise can improve your life expectancy. Now, this doesn't mean that just because you exercise, you're going to live forever. But what it does mean is that with exercise, it helps you boost your immune system. So it makes your immune system stronger, and you're less likely to get sick with the flu or COVID even. So it tends to improve your immune system. So you're less likely to get sick. But also, if you're someone who's active and exercise, chances are you're probably not falling over, you're probably not breaking a hip, you're probably not going into hospital. So sort of a snowball effect of you doing exercise, and all these things go right along the path, and then it stops you from going into hospital and getting sick. And of course, we spoke about neuroprotective. So exercise has a neuroprotective benefit where it preserves your brain cells for much longer, so you're less likely to have an increased deterioration in your Parkinson's disease. And as we get into the winter months, it's darker, it's wetter, you don't want to go outside as much, which is completely normal. Now, the purpose of this talk is not to tell you guys to, go out walking in the rain and the snow and the ice. Definitely not. It's just a way for us to talk about the specifics about exercise, about what type of exercise you may want to do, how long you want to do the exercise for, how intense the exercise should be, and hopefully it serves as a way for you to structure or create an exercise program for you at home that works during these darker months. Now, another million-dollar question is, what type of exercise should we do? Now, you probably heard lots of different conflicting informations. Maybe someone tells you, well, I heard boxing is really great for Parkinson's. Somebody else might say, well, I heard swimming's really great, or I heard, those Parkinson-specific gym exercises are really great. And you might be thinking, okay, so with all of this information out there, what exactly would be the best type of exercise to do, and what should I be doing? Well, the answer to that is, in reality, there is no specific type of exercise that is better than the other. So we can't tell you that, yes, boxing is so much better than dance, and it's so much better than gym circuits, or it's so much better than walking, because we don't have any proven information about what type of exercise would be better than the other. But what we do know is, if we look at all the Parkinson's-specific exercise programs out there, or the successful exercise programs for Parkinson's out there, you can see that there are a lot of similarities and different components of the exercise program that makes it effective for people with Parkinson. So I've listed them here on the slide. So the first one is the exercise that you choose to do. If you want it to be beneficial for your Parkinson's, it has to be moderate to high intensity, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the next coming slides. Now, when I say moderate to high intensity, I don't want you to think that you have to work so hard that you feel like you're going to faint and you're gasping for breath. Definitely not that, but you're looking for something that pushes your boundaries. So if you're someone who's doing an exercise program, and sure, you might be tired, maybe you're sweating a little bit, but if you feel like, well, if I really had to, if someone made me and I couldn't stop, could I still keep going? Could I do a little bit more? Could I put a little bit more effort? If the answer is yes, the chances are you're probably not working at a high enough intensity as you'd like to. The second thing is it has to have an aerobic component. So aerobic meaning that you do something long enough and with enough repetition that you feel your heart rate going up. You can feel your heart beating in your chest. You probably get a bit more sweaty. Maybe you're panting a little bit, a little more breathless. And you also want a strength component. So strength component, not necessarily meaning you have to lift weights or you have to do 1,000,000 push-ups, but strength as in an exercise program that makes you repeat a movement enough times for you to build a certain muscle group in the body that it's intended to build. So for example, perhaps you're doing a sit to stand as a part of program. And you do it, I don't know, as an example, let's say you do it 20 times. So that would be a strength component because you're pushing the boundaries of how many times you can do this one activity, and you might feel your thigh muscles burning by the end of the 20 times. Well, then yes, that is a strength component because you're stressing your body, you're challenging your body in order to improve in certain strength in certain muscle groups in the body. There should also be a balance component. So a balance component is usually, it's not as in you have to stand on one leg. So, it's not you have to find a program that makes you, I don't know, close your eyes or make you stand on one leg. Not necessarily that. So balance components tend to be things that involve weight shifting, turning. It doesn't have to be turning on the spot, but it could be, pivoting, walking in different directions, maybe lunges. So things that require you to move your feet in different directions and weight shift would be balance components. And then you also want to look for a program that has the flexibility and stretch component, meaning that something that challenges your amplitude movement. So something that makes you move in a really big motion. So, maybe things that make you reach out really far, things that make you twist your body. It doesn't have to be a static stretch where you're just standing there and you're stretching, not necessarily, but the stretch could be part of the exercise movement where you're doing something, but they make you, stretch your arms, stretch your legs in different movements to get as much length as you can. And then, of course, you also want a cognitively stimulating component, which is probably the most challenging for a lot of people. And a cognitive stimulating component would be things like a dual task challenge. So maybe you're doing a physical exercise while also doing a cognitive task. So for example, maybe you're doing multi-directional lunges, and at the same time, perhaps you're naming items you can find in the spice aisle at the supermarket from the letters A to Z or something like that. Or you might be doing math problems, or you might be counting backwards from 107s. While you're doing a physical task. So things that require you to have divided attention in the brain would be things that would be cognitively stimulating. And this is also true for things that require you to problem solve. So if you're doing an obstacle course, you might not be dual tasking and saying anything verbally, but perhaps you're doing some kind of physical activity. You're walking around obstacles, you're navigating obstacles, you're going over and under obstacles, finding out ways for you to get across this course. That would work as a cognitive stimulating component as well. And the most important component for a successful Parkinson-specific exercise program would be a behavioral change component, which I've put in bold here. So when we talk about behavior change component, we're talking about things that make you feel like you can keep up with this program easier. So it tend to be things that have a social setting. So maybe you're attending a class, well, perhaps not now with COVID, but let's say you're doing an online class every week. And having this online class and you're seeing everybody in the class, perhaps that gives you a little bit of a sense of camaraderie, that everybody's in this together, everybody's working towards the same goal. Or if you are in a class with lots of people and you enjoy seeing these people every week, you enjoy the social component, that would help you with the behavioral change of being able to do exercises. Because let's face it, nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, okay, I am so excited to do exercises today. Probably not, unless you're someone who's done exercise for many years and it's part of a routine and you're used to it. But for the majority of us, we don't really wake up every day and go, yes, I am so excited and so gung-ho about doing these exercises. Chances are you're probably not really looking forward to it, or there's probably a million excuses for why you don't really want to do it today. And so having this behavior change component is super important to help motivate you, make you feel like you actually enjoy what you're doing and you actually want to do these exercises. So if we take an example of a popular Parkinson-specific exercise program, for example, if we talk about, I don't know, PD Warrior circuits, you can see that it hits all the items on this list with moderate to high intensity. There's an aerobic component, there's a strength component, there's a balance component, and blah, 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 blah. And so this is why that program is successful. And you can think about the same as other exercise programs like Dance for PD, for example. Why is that successful and why does that work? Well, it is moderate to high intensity because you're doing something over a long period of time and you're doing continuously. There's an aerobic component, there's a strength component of being able to hold your limbs in a certain position and maneuver your body throughout the living room. There's a balance component, there's a flexibility and stretch component, there's a cognitively stimulating component where you're listening for cues in the music, perhaps, for knowing when to start a certain move. And there's a behavioral change component because it's a fun class with music that you might enjoy, and there's lots of other people in the class who are doing it with you. So you can see that most, if not all, the Parkinson-specific programs out there have these components. So you can see that it's not about what exercise program is better than the other. It's not putting exercise programs against each other. There is no right answer for what is better than the other. The ultimate importance is you find an exercise that you actually enjoy, because if you're doing something that you don't really like and you're kind of dreading it, chances are you're probably not going to keep up with it. And therefore, it doesn't matter how good the program, if you're not going to keep up with it, there's not really a point. It's not really going to benefit you. So if anybody asks, what is the best type of exercise out there? What's better for Parkinson's? The answer is none of them are better than each other. As long as you have an exercise program that hits most, if not all, of these things listed on the sheet, the components listed here, it's probably a pretty good program for your Parkinson's. And the most important thing is finding something you actually enjoy. So, now that we found something that you enjoy, whether that might be an aqua class, whether that might be following a YouTube channel, exercise, whether that might be walking with poles outdoors, whatever it may be. Now we got to think about how intense the exercise should be. So we mentioned earlier that choosing the type of exercise is not really enough. So for example, you could be someone who says, okay, well, I walk around at home a lot. I, have stairs at home. So I go up and down the stairs 3 times a day. Well, while that's great, that is activity that you're doing, that can't really be counted as exercise. Walking around at home is great because you're not sitting down the whole day, but it's also not enough to actually give you the benefits you want in order to change or manage your Parkinson's symptoms. So it comes down to intensity, really. So what intensity do we want? So we mentioned moderate to high intensity in our previous slide. So what that really means is when we look at the research involving Parkinson's and exercise, we can see that what they're saying is the most beneficial intensity for Parkinson's is actually working at about 70 to 85% of your max heart rate. And the way that you traditionally calculate that would be to take the number 220 and you subtract that by your age. So you go 220 minus your age, and whatever that number you get is, that would be your max heart rate for your age. So the maximum amount of beats your heart can beat for someone your age. So if we then take that max heart rate and we calculate 70 to 85% of that, that is technically the range of heart rate you want to work in when you do your Parkinson's exercise. But when we say that, I don't want you all to now go out and buy heart rate monitors and think, okay, well, I must hit at least 70%, because what you'll find is that might be possible when you're really early on in your diagnosis. But as the disease progresses and as we get older, it's actually pretty hard to bring your heart rate up to that 70 to 85% margin. And part of that reason is because with Parkinson's comes changes to your nervous system where your heart rate just can't go up as high as someone without Parkinson's. And so rather than relying solely on a heart rate monitor, what we always suggest is use something called perceived exertion, which basically just means your subjective reporting of how hard you think you're working. So something to aim for would be you want to be sweaty, you want to be panting, and you want to be breathless, and you want to feel your heart beating in your chest maybe, but you want to feel sweaty and breathless enough when you're doing the exercise, but still able to talk in full sentences. Not comfortably, but you can still do it if you have to talk in full sentences, right? So that's the kind of intensity you're aiming for. And so when you're doing your Parkinson's specific exercise, if you don't feel like you're reaching to the point where you feel sweaty or panting or breathless, perhaps there's something you need to tweak in the program. And now, if we talk about, so we talked about the type of exercise to do. So we mentioned that there's no type that's better than the other, as long as the exercise program you choose hits most, if not all, of the components that was listed. And then on top of that, with those exercise programs, you also want to hit an intensity of moderate to high intensity, meaning that when you're doing the exercise, you want to be sweating, you want to be panting, you want to be breathless, but still able to talk in full sentences. And so now we move on to the slide where we talk about, okay, now that we have all those things in mind, how often do I actually need to do my exercise? Well, there's no actual research out there that shows a Parkinson's specific frequency of exercise. So there's nothing specific to Parkinson's out there. But with that said, because of the universal benefits of exercise, we then use the Canadian Guidelines of Physical Activity for Adults. And based on that, you want to aim for about 150 minutes of exercise per week. So 150 minutes of exercise per week, not per day, per week, which works out to be 2.5 hours, spread out however you like over the 7 days. Now, if you're someone who does walking outdoors, let's say, you might ask, okay, well, does my 20-minute walk a day, does that count towards the 150 minutes? Well, the answer is that depends. Is your walk at a moderate to high intensity? If it is, then yes, it counts towards the 150 minutes a week or 2.5 hours a week. If it isn't in the moderate to high intensity range, then no, it doesn't count. Because remember, this number here, the 150 minutes of moderate to high intensity exercise, we're looking for neuroactive exercises, meaning something that can change and manage your Parkinson's symptoms, not just activity. So this is not 150 minutes of activity, but it's 150 minutes of exercise you're looking for per week. And the moderate to high intensity would be what we spoke about in the previous slide, where you're doing some kind of activity and you're aiming for it being intense enough that you're sweating, you're panting, you're breathless, you can feel your heart beating in your chest, but you can still talk in full sentences. So 150 minutes of that intensity is what you're aiming for per week. And so if you look at this number, it doesn't mean that you have to do, an hour's worth of exercise every day. Definitely not. You can spread it out however you like. Perhaps you're doing 30 minutes and maybe you're doing that 5 days a week, or maybe you're doing 45 minutes and you're doing that 3 times a week, or whatever it may be. You can spread it out. It does not have to be something you do daily, as long as you aim for 150 minutes. But of course, if you wanted to do more than that, even better, right? So 150 minutes is a minimum. So if you do 150 minutes of moderate to high intensity, it will be enough to show benefits of the exercise where you feel like you're getting stronger, you'll feel a little bit more agile on your feet. But if you want even more benefits to that, then doing more than 150 minutes would be great. But as a general rule of thumb, start with 150 and see how you do. Now, perhaps you're someone who is thinking, okay, well, 150 minutes is pretty scary already for moderate to high intensity. And you're maybe asking the question, okay, so if I do 150 minutes of moderate to high intensity exercise a week, how long do I have to do this for? Is this something I do for, a month and then I could ease off and take a break? Well, the answer is that depends. It depends on what you're aiming for and what your goals are for doing your exercise. So, of course, there's no cure right now for Parkinson's, and symptoms of Parkinson's need to be managed for life. And therefore, so should your exercise routine if your exercise routine is for managing of symptoms. Now, it might sound a bit scary, it might be a bit overwhelming, but if you think about anything else you do during the day, everything has to be consistent. Everything has to be done with enough repetition in order for it to be a routine. So think of exercise much like brushing your teeth or getting dressed in the morning. Perhaps when you were a kid, you didn't really like brushing your teeth. You didn't like getting dressed in the morning. It was so much of a hassle doing it. But as you get older and the more you do this brushing teeth activity, the getting dressed activity, the more it becomes ingrained and the more it becomes second nature. And you can think of exercise exactly the same way. In order to change a behavior and have a permanent behavior as part of a routine, it takes at least about 6 to 8 weeks. So if you can do your exercises consistently for 6 to 8 weeks, chances are after that period, it's probably pretty easy and pretty second nature for you to maintain that activity over time where you don't even really think about it. You just do it because you've done it for so long. And so having a schedule and setting a time, a routine for yourself to do your exercise is very important. So you want to try to keep it as consistent as possible. So rather than thinking, okay, I'm going to exercise twice a week, for example, rather than just thinking that, actually set yourself a specific date and time you're actually going to do your exercise. Because otherwise you'll go out through, you'll live your week thinking, okay, well, I'm going to do 2 times a week. Well, it's only Monday, so I'll do it tomorrow. And then Tuesday comes, you're like, well, I'll do it tomorrow. And then Wednesday comes, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. But if you set yourself a very specific time where you go, okay, every Monday and Thursday, for example, at 11 a.m., that's when I'm doing my exercise, then you're more likely to be consistent with it because you keep yourself accountable. It's like having appointments with your doctors. You have it on your calendar, you keep it, and you always make sure you show up for that specific activity that you're doing. So hopefully that makes sense. Even though it might seem overwhelming about having to keep up with this routine, but if you keep it consistent and you do it for 6 to 8 weeks, it will become easier and you will no longer see it as a hassle to do the activity. Hopefully I haven't lost anyone. If you have any questions, do feel free to type in the chat box. So after all of that, so now we know what type of exercise, so the components you're looking for in an exercise program. We talked about the intensity of the exercise. So how do you know when something's at the right intensity? And we talked about how many times a week you need to do an exercise or what's your minimum frequency you're aiming for. And we talked about how long you have to keep the exercise routine for. So now let's talk about the actual bits of how you can be motivated and how you can find an activity you enjoy and try to keep up with it. And how do you generally start that? Well, the first things first is you need to find an exercise that you enjoy. It could be anything at all. It could be anything as long as you're trying to keep as many of those components we listed. But if you think about exercise regimes in general, the majority of them probably have all, if not most, if not all, of those components that we listed earlier. So find an exercise that you enjoy. Don't just do an exercise program because your neighbor who's a nurse told you that, this particular exercise is really good for Parkinson's, because if you don't like it, it doesn't matter how great the exercise is, chances are you're probably not going to keep up with it. So if you're someone who hates doing gym circuit exercises, well, maybe think about something else. Maybe try Pilates, try dance, try boxing, try swimming, try power walking, try anything that you think might be enjoyable. And once you've found an exercise that you enjoy, it might be worth thinking about getting an exercise buddy to just make your exercise regime more social and more enjoyable in general. Now, of course, getting an exercise buddy might have been a bit easier pre-COVID times because you're actually going out, you're seeing friends. But even now that we're staying at home, you can still have an exercise buddy. Perhaps it's your spouse, it might be a family member, and you can set up a time where you do exercises together every week. So it's not just you doing it and them watching you do it, but you're actually making a point to do this fitness regime together every week. And so you hold each other accountable because you rely on the other person to show up with you to do the exercise regime. Now, pre-COVID times, another good strategy of making this exercise regime more sociable is if you have a friend who, you've always wanted to meet up for coffee or see, but you just really haven't gotten the chance to do it. Well, then perhaps you can make it a weekly thing where you go out and do an exercise class together, and then you go for lunch or you go for coffee. So then it's something you look forward to every week, because not only is it an exercise class, it's a chance for you to bond with that friend or family member or whoever it is that you're doing the exercise regime with. Now, the next thing that you can do to set yourself up for success is also being very specific about why you're exercising. So even though it's great to want to exercise, but you actually need to have a personal goal and a personal attachment to why you're doing this exercise in order for you to keep it. Because if you're just doing it because someone told you the exercise is really good and you're like, well, yeah, I should probably do exercise, I should probably keep my symptoms under control, but you're kind of not keeping up with your exercise, well, maybe it's a sign that you have to make it more personal. You have to make the reasons you're exercising more motivating for yourself, rather than just thinking, I'm exercising because my neurologist told me to. So the goals that you set for yourself could be, or the reasons you exercise could be as broad or as personal as you want it to be. So perhaps you're thinking, okay, well, my goal is I want to be able to walk, 10,000 steps a day or something like that. Or it might be, right, I want to be able to exercise at 150 minutes of moderate to high intensity exercise a week. But it can also be something a lot more personal, something that means something to you. For example, if you don't like the way you're walking, your balance isn't great, but you know that your daughter is getting married in a year's time and you want to be able to walk her down the aisle without your cane, without falling over, perhaps that's a motivating goal because that's something that's important to you. Or maybe you're exercising because you want to live longer, to see your grandkids grow up. Or maybe you're exercising because you want to improve relationships around you. You want to improve the relationship of you and your caregiver, or your relationship with your family in general, and you want to be more independent. Whatever your reason for exercising is, I suggest you write it down and you be very honest with yourself about why you're exercising, because thinking about the reasons you're exercising is not necessarily enough. If you write it down, it makes it more permanent, it makes it real, it makes it something that you actually have thought about and that you actually want to follow through on for the reasons that you're doing this program, the reasons that you're exercising. And then, of course, we know that there is always 1,000,001 reasons why we don't want to do an exercise program on a given day. So perhaps you've set yourself up, you've done all of this, you have your goals, you have your exercise buddy, but then the day of the exercise comes around and you just think, oh God, well, I didn't really have good sleep last night. So, I'm too tired. Maybe I don't want to do anything. Or, my back's hurting a bit today. Maybe I don't want to do anything. Whatever the barriers may be, it's also a good idea to write these barriers down and be as honest and be as specific as possible with yourself about what it is that's stopping you from exercising. So perhaps it's, I just don't have time. If you're a caregiver, maybe you think, I just don't have time. I have so much to do. I just don't have time to exercise. Or you might be thinking, well, I always feel really bad about myself when I exercise because whenever I do the classes, it's too hard, it's too fast, I can't follow along, or I'm just too tired to exercise. Whatever the barriers may be, write them down, and then beside them, think of solutions of how you can conquer those barriers, how you can overcome those barriers. So, for example, time restraints that we talked about. So if you're someone who thinks, well, I just don't have enough time, well, can you think of a way around that? Maybe every morning you wake up, you spend, 15 minutes doing something some kind of exercise, and then maybe at lunchtime, before lunch, you do another 15 minutes. So you can divide it up like that, as long as you're doing at least 10 minutes in one go. So if you do less than 10 minutes in one go, it's not effective. But if you do at least 10 minutes in one go, then it is effective. So you can maybe think about dividing the time up that way throughout the day. Or maybe there's downtime during the week. Maybe you want to do the exercise over the weekend or something like that. Find ways that works with your schedule in order to overcome that barrier. If it was a barrier about, well, I just didn't get good sleep last night, I'm really tired, I don't really want to do it. Well, can you start the exercise program if it was an exercise class? Could you do the first half of the class and see how you feel? Could you do the first 10 minutes and see how you feel? And maybe you take more breaks during it. Or maybe as you start doing the class, you get a second wind and you feel better and you think, well, actually, I do have energy now that I've started the program. So things like that be really effective as long as we're being very honest with ourselves and we're listing the excuses that we may have or the barriers that we may have. And it doesn't have to be something you share with others, just something you hold yourself accountable for. Because ultimately, you're trying to convince yourself. You're not trying to convince your care partner that you're going to try to do an exercise program. You're not trying to convince your next door neighbor. You're convincing yourself. You're trying to convince yourself to do this exercise program for your own health and for your own benefit. So you're your own client that you're trying to get to be motivated here. And another thing that would be useful with all of these things said is about finding the exercise buddy, about finding a personal goal, your reasons for exercising, listing your barriers and solution for it. Well, if you have a journal, an exercise journal, that'd be very handy to keep all of these things in there. And it can be a journal that doesn't have to be necessarily very detailed. It can literally be, you write the date. So every time you want to do exercise, you write the date. You might write what you're feeling that day before you do the exercise, what your excuses are that day for not wanting to do the exercise, what your reason is that day for doing the exercise. And that way you can look back and hold yourself accountable and remember whether you've actually held true to your goals or not. So you might, because normally we live with ourselves, we don't really see the changes on a daily basis. Maybe you think, well, actually, I've been very good this month with my exercises. I've done them sometimes, I think. But then you look back, you might think, oh, actually, I've only done 3 days this month. So maybe that's something you want to work on. And while you have the exercise journal, it's also a good idea to include a calendar in there. Or if not in your journal, perhaps, stick it on the fridge, on the wall, maybe in your phone or something like that, where you have a calendar and you are very specific about the routine that you hold for yourself for the exercise. So rather than thinking, I'm going to do exercise 3 times a week or 2 times a week, be specific about the days and times that you're actually going to do that. It's like taking your medication. Be specific about the days and times you're going to do it, and the chances are you probably will follow through if you're very specific about the days and times of when you're doing those things. Hopefully that makes sense so far. So now, we talked about setting goals. We talked about keeping a exercise diary, a journal. We talked about having a calendar. Well, here are some examples now of things that you might want to do, so maybe ways that you want to structure your goal sheet or your calendar. Now, the next 2 pages are taken from our upcoming exercise booklet, which Parkinson Society has created and we will publish, hopefully in the new year, which has more or less the things that we talked about today and a little bit more. And the idea of this exercise booklet is to try to get it to be as user-friendly as possible so you can actually use it as a resource. And at the back of this exercise booklet, there is actually 10 example exercises that you can do as a daily routine if you would like. So you can see on here the weekly goals. So this is an example of what you can do to create your exercise journal. So remember we talked about how behaviors usually take about 6 to 8 weeks to become permanent. So if you're starting a new exercise program from scratch, you've never exercised before, you're not very consistent. If you want to make exercising consistent, you would have to do it consistently for 6 to 8 weeks in order for it to then be ingrained. So perhaps something like this would be a great way to go about it. It doesn't have to be very long. Maybe you list week 1 to week 6, and you write down your goals, maybe in point form. What is your goal every week? And it can be something small to start with, like, okay, well, I want to do 100 steps this week every day. And then maybe the next week could be, I want to do 200 steps. Or it could be, I want to go out for a walk for 20 minutes, 3 times a week. And then slowly increase that over time. So the idea of this, you gradually increase your goal and you make them harder and harder. So you don't want to start off with a really hard goal, because you're never going to achieve it if it's going to be something like, I want to do 20,000 steps a day. And if you're someone who does only 50 steps a day, chances are you're not going to get that right away. And it's probably going to feel pretty discouraging if you don't reach the goal. So you want to set yourself up for success. You want to make the goal something that's bite-sized, something that you can definitely achieve if you put in some effort. So then that way you set yourself up and you feel encouraged every week when you tick that box that says, yes, I have achieved my goals. So that's probably a good way of going about it. But of course, you don't necessarily have to do weekly goals. If you have one goal, such as, you want to be able to walk your daughter down the aisle, then perhaps you can make that as an overarching goal, and then you can break that down. So how long is the aisle? If the aisle is, I don't know, let's say it's 5 meters long, and you're walking on, it's flat. So it's on a flat level. It's not a slope or anything. It's 5 meters, and you can only walk a few steps right now. Maybe you're thinking, okay, well, every day this week, I'm going to walk 10 steps. And then the next week, I'm going to walk, 20 steps or whatever it may be. And you slowly build up that tolerance. And that works for any other goals as well. Find an overarching goal, your main goal for why you're doing the exercise, and then think about how you can break that down into mini goals over a 6 to 8 week period. So that way you're slowly achieving your way there to the overarching goal. Otherwise, it'll be very daunting and overwhelming to try to get to the overwhelming goal without actually knowing how to get there or having a plan for what you're going to do to get yourself there. This is an example calendar that you can use for your exercise. So of course, it's just a plain calendar. But what we've got here is, the idea is it doesn't have to be a huge calendars with lots of space where you can write necessarily. It can be something as simple as a plain calendar that you maybe write at the top. Okay, well, the exercise that I chose is I'm going to do some pool walking, for example, or some aqua exercises. So maybe you write at the top, that's what it's for. It's for aqua exercises, pool walking. And then you might write underneath that, okay, I'm going to do this Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 1:30 p.m. because that's when my medication is the most effective and that's when I feel the best. So I'm going to do those exercises Monday, Wednesday, Friday at that specific time. Then you see this calendar, and what you do is every time you do the exercise on that given day, you just do a tick. You just have a tick. So then over time, you look back on this calendar and you just have ticks where you've done the exercise on the specific days that you're meant to do those exercises. So then you can look back overall at that calendar, that month calendar, and think, yep, I think I've hit my goals this month. And then perhaps there's a little button at the bottom or a little checkbox at the bottom that says monthly goal achieved. And you would go, yeah, I've achieved that. So I think anything that lets you confirm that you've done the goal. So anything that gives you a tick box or something that you can, circle, or something that you can confirm that you've done it would be really, really helpful, because it's something that holds yourself accountable for doing something. And you might want to bargain with yourself as well. If you're someone who knows that, motivation is very difficult, maybe you bargain with yourself and you think, okay, well, I really enjoy eating these Christmas chocolates that I have on my table. And you think, okay, well, every day that I do my exercise at the right intensity and at the right frequency, I'm going to treat myself by eating 1 chocolate or 2 chocolates or something like that. Or it might be the same for a book that you're reading. Maybe you sit down all day and you read books all day, which is absolutely fine, but you want to motivate yourself for exercise. And then you think, okay, for every chapter that I read, I'm going to do 10 minutes of an exercise. the same way for maybe giving your family phone calls. If you really enjoy calling your grandkids, you think, okay, every day that I do exercise, I'm going to call my grandkids. So then you have that to look forward to, that kind of reward that you're giving yourself to hold yourself even more accountable for the program that you set for yourself. And of course, in order to make things as barrier-free as possible, if you're someone who's thinking, this all sounds great, but how do I start an exercise? I don't know any exercises to do. Well, the good thing is, through Parkinson Society, all of our exercise resources are free. So we talked about the upcoming PSBC exercise booklet, so the booklet that we've made, and will go to print and hopefully released in the new year. So with that booklet, that exercise booklet that's coming out, it's got all the stuff we talked about today and more. And it's also got example exercises, which is really good for people who don't have internet or who aren't comfortable doing online classes. You can follow the paper version and do exactly the same thing. Use your goal sheet, use your calendar, and hold yourself accountable that way. And I know there are lots of familiar faces in this webinar today, so a lot of you probably have already used the exercise classes that we have online. So Parkinson Society, every week we have a exercise class, and they're usually a different theme every month. So it might be a balance class, it might be a hand dexterity class, it might be a freezing class, it might be a low impact class, it might be a high impact class. So we have something different every week. And our next exercise series coming up is in January, which is our hand and dexterity one. So you can always go to our website and have a look at the educational events that we have coming up and sign up for the ones that you like. They're all free. And of course, you can also follow our YouTube channel, which is Parkinson Society BC. And on the YouTube channel, we've got playlists of all the different exercise classes we've ever hosted, and the recordings are all on there. So if you did want to sign up for a class, but for some reason you missed it, you can always go back on there and watch those videos. Or maybe you didn't miss the classes, but you really enjoyed it and you want to go back and you want to do it in your exercise routine again. So you can go on the YouTube channel, maybe pick a different exercise video to do your exercises to every time you want to exercise during the week. So these are all really great resources that you can use. And the reason they're barrier-free is because they're free. As long as you have an internet connection, you can access these resources. So hopefully it'll be pretty simple and straightforward to use. I did put at the top of the chat box as well our YouTube channel, which you can click on. So if you want to click on that and save that link on your computer, that's fine as well. But the link is also listed on the slides. So that's it. That's it for me. And hopefully all of that made sense. I tried to make it as short, as sweet as possible, just so that way I'm not bombarding you with a lot of information, but hopefully that makes sense. And the purpose of it is just to give you an understanding of what you can do to create an exercise program. I mean, these are all the tools that your physiotherapist would use to create an exercise program. So by all means, you can use the same tools to get yourself active and use these tools for your own exercise programs in the future. So thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, you can feel free to type in the chat box and I will do my best to answer them. But of course, if you didn't want to type in the chat box, you can always email us as well, which our email, the general one would be info@parkinson.bc.ca. Or you can email me on my personal one, which is syu@parkinson.bc.ca as well. And I will do my best to answer your individual questions if you have any. Or if you just want to get some more tips on how you can tailor programs for yourself, if you have a very specific request, let me know and I can do my best to help you with that as well. Great. Thank you, everybody. I think we'll probably leave the webinar room open for another few minutes just in case anybody thinks of any questions, but if not, that's absolutely fine as well. And thank you for the wonderful comments in the chat box. I can see them popping up as you type them.